I don't know how long I have before it finds me. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened. Someone needs to understand that if you ever find a basement that isn't supposed to be there, don't go inside. I learned that lesson too late. Started when I moved into my new house. It was an old place built in the 1920s, but it had character. The realtor had warned me about the creaky floors and outdated wiring, but she never mentioned anything about a basement. The house wasn't supposed to have one. There was no door to a lower level, no staircase leading underground. But 2 weeks after moving in, I found it. I had been rearranging the furniture in the living room when I noticed a strange seam in the floor. The wood slats didn't quite match, and when I knocked on it, the sound was hollow. My stomach twisted. I didn't remember seeing anything about a crawl space in the listing. Grabbing a crowbar, I pried at the edges. After a few minutes of effort, the wood groaned and a section of the floor lifted. A dark hole yawned beneath me. A ladder, old and rusted, led down into the void. A damp, moldy smell wafted up. I should have stopped there. I should have left it alone. But curiosity got the better of me. I turned on my flashlight and started climbing down. The basement was wrong. It wasn't made of concrete like a normal foundation. The walls were rough, damp stone, like an old cellar. The air was thick, stale. The ceiling was lower than it should have been, forcing me to hunch. And the worst part? There was a door. A massive wooden door stood at the far end of the basement, its surface covered in deep scratches. Something had clawed at it over and over. I swallowed, gripping my flashlight tighter. The door had no handle, just a rusted keyhole in the center. Then the scratching started. At first, I thought I imagined it. A faint, distant scrape from the other side of the door. Then another, slow, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away, heart pounding. But as I turned to climb the ladder, a gust of freezing air rushed through the room. And then I heard it. A whisper. "Let me out." I froze. My skin turned ice cold. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. Something was speaking to me. "Please, I've been trapped for so long." The voice was soft. Too soft. I shouldn't have responded. I should have climbed out, nailed the floor shut, and never looked back. But instead, my lips parted. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, a slow knock on the door. 3 knocks. Boom, boom, boom. I stumbled backward, tripping over debris. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the darkness beyond the door. A shape, tall, twisted. I ran. I scrambled up the ladder, breathing hard, my hands slick with sweat. As I reached the top, I slammed the floor shut and shoved a heavy dresser over it. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. For hours I sat on the floor, waiting, listening. But the whispering never came again. For a while, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, that I had let the darkness and the damp air get to me. Then the nightmares started. I dreamed of the basement every night. I dreamed of something behind the door, its long fingers reaching through the cracks, its voice whispering my name. I woke up covered in sweat, the sound of scratching still echoing in my ears. And then one night, I woke up to a new sound. Not a whisper, not scratching, the floorboards creaking. I held my breath. Something was moving in my house. Slow, shuffling footsteps echoed from the living room. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The dim glow barely cut through the darkness as I crept toward the sound. And then I saw it. The dresser had moved. The hatch to the basement was open. The air turned deathly cold. Something had come up. A shadow shifted in the corner of the room. Tall, too tall. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin, bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. Its face, God, its face. A gaping black hole where its mouth should have been. And the whisper, asterisk, asterisk, that horrible whisper, asterisk, asterisk, came from deep inside it. "Thank you for letting me out." I don't remember much after that. I ran. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the house, my heart slamming against my ribs. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, not caring. I never went back. I left everything behind, My clothes, my furniture, my photos. The house is probably still there, sitting empty, waiting for the next person to make the same mistake I did. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, my phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. You forgot to close the door. The basement that shouldn't exist. I should have never bought this house. I knew something was off the moment I stepped inside, but I ignored my instincts. It was a steal, a 4-bedroom Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, priced way below market value. The real estate agent avoided eye contact when I asked why it was so cheap. She mumbled something about old foundations and needing work. I should have walked away, but I didn't. For the first few months, everything seemed normal. Sure, the house creaked at night, and some rooms were colder than others, but that's just old houses, right? At least that's what I told myself. Then I found the basement. I hadn't even realized the house had one. It wasn't listed in the floor plans. There was no obvious entrance. But one day, while cleaning out the pantry, I knocked over a shelf, and behind it, hidden in the wall, was a door. A heavy, metal door with no handle on the outside. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Why would someone seal off a basement? Most people would have left it alone. But I'm not most people. I pried the door open with a crowbar, and the second it creaked apart, a wave of stale, damp air hit me like a wall. A staircase spiraled down into the darkness. No light switch, just a yawning black void. I hesitated, gripping my phone for light. The basement shouldn't have been there. It was too deep. The stairs went on far longer than they should have. The air grew colder the deeper I went. I told myself I'd only take a quick look, just enough to satisfy my curiosity. Big mistake. At the bottom, my phone's flashlight revealed a vast, open space. The walls weren't made of concrete but of stone. Old, cracked stone, damp with something that smelled like rot. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then I saw them. Tall, wooden doors lined the far wall. 6 of them, each identical except for the deep claw marks gouged into the wood. I should have left right then and there, but my feet carried me forward. The doors had no handles, only rusted keyholes, and beneath each one, a thin sliver of darkness, like something was pressed up against it from the other side. I stood there, pulse hammering in my ears. The silence was unnatural, too still, too expectant. Then, a whisper, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "Help me." My breath hitched, came from behind the 3rd door. I took a step closer. The whisper came again, slightly louder. "Please, let me out." I swallowed hard. My hands trembled as I reached out. Then scratch. A slow, deliberate scrape against the inside of the wood. Long and deep like nails dragging. Something was in there. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I couldn't move. Then, one by one, the keyholes went dark. I don't know how else to explain it. One second, they were empty. The next, something on the other side was peering through them. Watching me, I staggered back. The whisper turned into a chorus. "Let us out. Please. We're so hungry." I bolted. I scrambled up the stairs, gasping, my heart slamming against my ribs. The metal door wouldn't budge. Something banged against the doors below. Once, twice. The whispers turned to growls. Then silence. A new sound crept in. The slow creak of hinges. I didn't look back. I threw my shoulder against the metal door, desperate, and with one final heave, it flew open. I slammed it shut behind me, shoving the shelf back into place. I stood there, panting, shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made me flinch. The house felt wrong. The air was heavier. The shadows stretched too far. And then, at 3:33 a.m., I heard it. A soft knock, coming from behind the pantry door. I moved out the next day. I didn't sell the house. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed my things and left. But sometimes, late at night, I get calls from an unknown number. When I answer, there's silence. And then, "We found you." The basement that should have stayed locked. I never wanted a basement. When my wife, Sarah, and I bought the house, we picked it for the space, the backyard, and the price. But the basement? That was a surprise. It wasn't in the listing. In fact, we didn't even realize it existed until the day we moved in. We had been unpacking, dragging boxes through the kitchen, when I noticed something odd about the floor. A seam in the wood, barely visible. At first, I thought it was just an old repair job, but when I stepped on it, the floor gave slightly. Hollow. Curious, I got a flashlight and pried at the edges. After some effort, a hidden door popped open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase leading into darkness. The air that rushed out smelled stale, damp, like something long forgotten. Sarah stood behind me, arms crossed. Nope, not happening. I grinned at her. Come on, aren't you curious? Nope, she said again. You're the one always watching horror movies. You should know this is a bad idea. She wasn't wrong, but curiosity got the better of me. I started down, phone flashlight cutting through the thick shadows. The walls were stone, rough and uneven, as if someone had hastily carved the place out. The staircase led to a small room, maybe 10 feet across. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, but when I pulled the chain, nothing happened. The only thing in the room was a door. A heavy, metal door, rusted and locked tight with an old iron latch. A shiver crawled down my spine. Who builds a basement like this? I reached out, fingers brushing the latch, and then Sarah screamed. I whipped around and sprinted up the stairs. She stood in the kitchen, pale as a ghost. What happened? I asked, breathless. She pointed at the floor. It started to close. I turned back to the hatch. It was wide open now, just as I had left it. I forced a chuckle. Must have been the air shift or something. She didn't laugh. That night, I dreamed of the basement. I dreamed of the door, and I dreamed of something knocking on the other side. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted to let it go. I really did, but the mystery of it gnawed at me. Why was the basement hidden? Why was there a locked door down there? I had to know. Sarah was at work when I went back down. I brought a crowbar this time, determined to pry the door open. My breath fogged in the cold air. My pulse pounded in my ears as I wedged the crowbar under the latch and pushed. A loud snap echoed through the room. The latch broke. I hesitated, heart hammering. Then, with a deep breath, I pulled the door open. Darkness. The room beyond was vast, much larger than it should have been. My flashlight barely reached the far wall. The air was heavy, damp, carrying the faint scent of rot. The ground sloped downward like the basement kept going underground. And then I saw them. Footprints. Dozens of them, scattered across the dirt floor. Some fresh, some older. I turned back to the stairs and froze. The door was shut. I lunged forward, grabbed the handle, and yanked. It wouldn't budge. I slammed my fists against it. Sarah, I shouted. Sarah, if you can hear me. A sound cut through the silence. A whisper, not from behind the door. From behind me, slow, deliberate footsteps moved through the darkness. I spun around, flashlight shaking. My breath hitched as I caught a glimpse of something. A figure, pale, long-limbed, crawling. I stumbled backward, slamming against the door. The thing moved faster, its joints bending at unnatural angles, its fingers dragging across the dirt. And then, a hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed. The basement door flew open, light flooding in. Sarah stood above me, her face twisted in fear. I scrambled up the steps, slamming the hatch shut behind me. I bolted it. I sealed it with furniture, and I never went down there again. But the house wasn't the same after that. The floorboards creaked at night. Shadows stretched too far. And sometimes, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, a whisper, from beneath the floor. Let me out. The thing in the basement. There was something wrong with the basement in my new house. I knew it from the moment I stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, carrying a scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. The previous owner had sealed off the door, covering it with heavy planks nailed deep into the frame. It looked less like a renovation project and more like a warning. I should have listened, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I bought the house cheap, almost suspiciously cheap. A 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, too good to pass up. The realtor was eager to sell, barely making eye contact when I asked about the basement. Just some old foundation issues, she said. Nothing worth worrying about. She was lying. That first night, as I lay in bed, I heard something. Faint, distant, a scratching sound coming from the floor below. At first, I told myself it was the house settling or maybe mice. But as the night went on, the noises grew. A slow, deliberate dragging sound. I barely slept. The next morning, I made up my mind. I had to see what was down there. Took me hours to pry away the boards. The wood was old, brittle, but the nails were fresh, driven deep, as if someone really didn't want the door to open. When I finally pulled the last plank free, the door creaked open on its own. A gust of cold, damp air rushed up from the darkness. I hesitated, gripping my flashlight. The staircase descended sharply, vanishing into a pit of shadows. The walls were stone, slick with moisture. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I had come this far. Step by step, I went down. At the bottom, I found the first sign that something was very wrong. There was another door, not wooden, not normal. A heavy, iron door with a single, rusted keyhole. My pulse quickened. What kind of basement needs a door like this? I ran my fingers over the metal. Cold. Too cold. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then, a knock. A slow, deliberate knock from the other side. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking. The air grew thick, suffocating. My legs screamed at me to run, but I stayed. And then the whispering started. Soft. Too soft to make out the words. But there were multiple voices. Something was behind that door. Something waiting. I turned and bolted up the stairs, heart hammering against my ribs. As I reached the top, I slammed the door shut, dragging heavy furniture over it. I told myself I would leave it alone. I told myself I would never go down there again. But the house didn't let me forget. The knocking started every night at exactly 3:12 a.m. 3 knocks. Always 3. And then the whispering. It grew louder each night. The words clearer. Let us out. We're so hungry. I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend it wasn't real. Then one night my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Don't open the door. My hands went numb. My mouth went dry. I didn't respond. Couldn't. But that night the knocking came again. Only this time it wasn't from the basement. It was from my bedroom door. I barely slept after that. The next morning I made a decision. I called a locksmith, asking if he could come by and check the basement. I didn't mention the knocking. I didn't mention the whispers. When he arrived, I led him downstairs. He barely made it 3 steps before freezing. His face went pale. His hands trembled. What the hell is this? He muttered. You tell me, I said. He shook his head. I'm sorry I can't. I shouldn't be here. He turned and left without another word. I stood there, staring at the iron door, my breath fogging in the cold air. And then, the keyhole went dark. Something was watching me. I ran. I should have left the house that night. I should have packed my bags and never looked back. But I didn't, because I had to know. I had to know what was behind the door. I barely remember forcing myself down the stairs. My hands shook as I pressed against the cold iron. The whispering stopped. The house held its breath. And then, ever so slowly, the door unlocked. I didn't touch it. I didn't move, but the latch slid open with a metallic clang. The door creaked inward, revealing darkness. A darkness so thick, so absolute, it swallowed the light from my flashlight. And then something moved, something big. I turned and ran. The door slammed shut behind me, the whole house shaking as I stumbled up the stairs. I never went back. I sold the house at a loss, left the state, changed my number. But sometimes, in the dead of night, my phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. You left the door open.